Imagine walking to a familiar destination when suddenly the air shifts. It becomes heavy and odd. The colors of the day become muted and feel flat. Just then, a stranger passes you, dressed in the clothes of a long-forgotten age. They look as startled as you feel and quickly walk away from you, looking unsettled. Just as soon as it happens, the environment shifts back to normalcy. Stories like this occupy an unusual place in paranormal research. They aren't ghost stories and they don't fit into the UFO or cryptid categories. Instead, they describe moments when ordinary people claim to step briefly outside of their own era and for a few minutes slip into a reality that existed in the past or the future. Most stories end up as anecdotes or internet rumors. A few, however, are recorded and deserve closer attention. Welcome to Arcane Station. I'm your host, Mike Porter, and tonight we're talking about the subjects of time slips and out-of-place people. We will approach each event on a case-by-case basis, utilizing verified sources where available, and employ cautious skepticism, clearly defining distinctions between documentation, speculation, and fabrication. Time slips first entered serious discussion in 1901 with an account published by two Oxford academics, but in recent years the phenomenon has migrated to modern platforms like TikTok and Reddit. The ingredients rarely change, typically a mundane location, a period of silence or distortion, and a witness who realizes afterwards that the details don't fit the current timeline. But before we get into the classic files from Europe, let's start with a modern case that demonstrates how the same pattern of the change of environment, heavy air and stillness, surfaces in exactly the same way as other cases, and how social media has become our newest gateway into the strange and paranormal. The most recent example comes from a 2023 segment on the TikTok channel Spooky Scary Storytime. In that video, the host Ashley received an email from a woman identified only as Maria, who recounted an incident that occurred in 2007 while traveling from Georgia to Florida with her siblings. According to her testimony, the group left Interstate 75 near Valdosta looking for fuel. After nearly an hour on a two-lane road, they found a small, isolated gas station surrounded by woods. She described the scene as unnaturally quiet. The only person visible was an older man in overalls, standing at the counter, watching but not speaking. Inside the gas station, things didn't match the era. Beverage cans and snack packages displayed designs that had been discontinued for decades. Prices were dramatically lower than normal. Chips under $1, soft drinks around 60 cents. The clerk seemed confused when Maria attempted to pay with a debit card, instead asking her for cash. The siblings quickly left. After driving several minutes, they realized that they couldn't relocate the highway that they assumed was just up the road. When they returned back, they found that same gas station, but this time it was boarded up and abandoned. Later, after the TikTok video went viral, Ashley claimed she received an anonymous email from a man who said his father had operated the gas station near Valdosta in 1984. The father, he wrote, often spoke of the people from the future appearing at the store, but also had a history of drug and alcohol abuse. Everyone thought he was crazy and didn't believe his story. Eventually, he passed away alone and believed to be insane. Sadly, the person who wrote the email said that they couldn't reveal their name because of their work, and they were worried that people would not believe them or think that they were insane. But what he said is that it helped validate what his father told him long ago. Unfortunately, there's no property records, photographs, or police reports to corroborate the story. This is an ongoing account that's being played out through social media channels. It's an abstracted game of telephone tag, without the names of individuals, exact locations of the supposed gas station, and no images of the man at the station to verify the story. As an investigator, I treat cases like this as modern folklore. Until a physical address or record surfaces, this account can't be trusted. Notably, the descriptions used to describe the event, though, such as the uncanny silence, outdated products, and quick reversion to normalcy, mirror older, better documented cases. So now that we have the most recent, let's look back at one of the first tales of time slips, and it's one of the most famous. The benchmark for all time slip reports remains the 1901 Versailles case. On August 10th of that year, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, both administrators at Oxford University, toured the gardens of the Palace of Versailles. Near the Petit Trianon, they said that the sunlight dimmed and the gardens took on what they later called a flat quality. They observed several figures in 18th century dress, a woman with a beautiful hat, sketching, men in clothes with lace cuffs, and servants carrying baskets. When they asked local staff afterward, no reenactment had been scheduled that day. 10 years later, they published a book called An Adventure under pseudonyms. The book became a bestseller, drawing attention from newspapers such as the Times of London, and later from the Society for Psychical Research, which verified that the women were indeed at Versailles on that date. Critics suggest misinterpretation, but there's no mundane explanation to match every detail of this event. Over a century later, the account still stands as the earliest full written record of a possible time slip. When you read the book, An Adventure, what strikes me isn't the supernatural language. There isn't any. But it's the tone. Both women wrote like academics, dry, factual, matter of fact. Whether or not they slipped through time, they documented what they believed they saw. As an example, in the preface of their book, they laid out this information. It is not our business to explain, nor to understand, nor do we pretend to understand what happened to put us into communication with so many true facts, which, 9 years ago, no one could have told us of their entirety. But in order that others may be able to judge fairly all of the circumstances, we have tried to record exactly what happened as simply and as fully as possible. Jump ahead 90 years and 490 miles to the northwest, and you'll find Bold Street in Liverpool. This is a pedestrian shopping area lined with cafes and chain stores. Beginning in the early 1990s, it also became the setting of a string of time slip accounts collected by local writer Tom Sleeman, later published in his book Strange Mysteries of Liverpool in 1997. One of the earliest accounts came from a retired police officer named Frank. He reported that while walking toward W.H. Smith bookstore, the air seemed to thicken. The shop's sign read Cripps, a retailer that had closed in the 1950s. People around him wore post-war clothing, and he stepped inside, blinked, and everything returned to its modern condition. Local journalists at the Liverpool Echo confirmed that Cripps had once operated on that same block in the mid-20th century. Since then, dozens of similar accounts have been submitted to Sleeman and to local paranormal investigators. Each includes the same key markers: sudden silence, visual dimming, recognition of anachronistic details, and an instantaneous return. From a reporting standpoint, Bold Street is valuable because the same location produces multiple independent testimonies. That pattern suggests that there's an environmental factor, which is, possibly electromagnetic, geological, or architectural, or it's a powerful case of collective myth building, but it also could be something far stranger. Around 200 miles from Liverpool lies two rural English villages, Kersey and Rougham, which are repeatedly cited in British research as time slip areas. In 1951, driver Geoffrey Evans wrote to the East Anglian Daily Times describing how the modern tarmac road near Kersey seemed to vanish. He found himself on a dirt lane, bordered by tall hedgerows. He passed cottages with thatched roofs and saw figures in plain 17th century clothing. Within moments, his vision ended and the road was modern again. Photographic records show that thatched villages were indeed in that area during the 1800s, but none by 1951. Paranormal historian David Goadsword later included the case in Haunted East Anglia in 2013. Rougham became known in the 1990s for similar reports. Local teacher Helen Jackson and her students recorded hearing horses and wooden cartwheels during a field trip, though no roads or reenactments were nearby. Researcher David Roth compiled multiple witness statements between 1990 and 2010 and published them in the Rougham Mystery, an investigation into the time slip phenomenon, and that was published in 2019. Both villages share the same structure: quiet countryside, layered local history, multiple overlapping accounts. I'm cautious with these cluster sites. They invite pattern seeking, but they also represent real people willing to document what they experience, and that's data worth keeping. The most widely cited professional witness in any time-slip file is Vice Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard of the Royal Air Force. His credentials are beyond dispute. He was a senior air commander during World War II and later became the head of air education. In 1935, he was sent on a mission to check out an abandoned Scottish airfield in the village of Drim. When he reached the airfield, he noted it was in terrible shape. In fact, he found cattle grazing on grass that had forced through the cracks of the tarmac. Author J.H. Brennan writes, later that day, Goddard ran into trouble while flying his biplane in heavy rain and decided to fly back to Drim to get his bearings. As he approached the airfield, the torrential rain abruptly changed to bright sunlight. He also notes that when Goddard looked down, the airfield was completely repaired and in use. In addition, 4 yellow aircraft stood on the runway, and ground crews wore blue uniforms unknown to him. 4 years later, the outbreak of World War II, RAF Drim was repaired and put back into action. There was another change as well. While the RAF's planes had previously been silver, in 1939 they were painted a bright yellow. The base officially reopened with exactly those features: yellow Harvard trainers and blue mechanic overalls. Goddard described the incident in his memoir, Flight Towards Reality, in 1975, and talked about them in earlier lectures that were reprinted in the Flying Review International in 1951. Skeptics such as science writer Ian Ridpath notes that Goddard's later memory could have been influenced by his knowledge of the base's eventual colors. Yet his flight logs confirm he flew over Drim on those dates. If he did see the future state of the airfield, it's one of the few time-slip cases involving forward displacement rather than retrograde. As I read his account, it's strikingly methodical. He lists altitude, weather, and position, not emotion, but he does have a bit of concern due to the growing tension in Europe at that time. That's the tone of a military report, not a ghost story. At this stage, a pattern is visible. The witnesses differ: scholars, soldiers, travelers. But their sensory language overlaps. They describe environmental silence, visual dullness, confusion about small details, and then an immediate return. There's rarely fear, just disorientation. Every report also includes a lack of transition, with the exception of Goddard's flying out of a storm. No tunnel, no fade. The world simply resets. From a scientific perspective, that's important. Hallucinations or memory lapses usually involve distortion or fading perception. These accounts don't. The next step in any responsible investigation is to consider consistency against geography, culture, and era. In the 1901 Versailles account, those educators come from a culture steeped in spiritualism. In the 1990s Bold Street stories, appear in a post-industrial city where folklore and civic identity intertwine. The 2023 TikTok account emerges from digital cultures built on viral storytelling. The contexts are different, yet the template of the event remains constant. That persistence either points to a universal psychological mechanism or to a genuine anomaly repeating under varied conditions. Every field that studies anomalies eventually hits a wall between rumor and record. Time-slip research is no exception. After reviewing the better documented incidents from France and the UK, the next step is to examine stories that have already been investigated and found to be lacking. These illustrate how myth spreads faster than verification. The most quoted out-of-place person story appeared in print long before the internet. It tells of a traveler detained at Tokyo's Haneda Airport in 1954, carrying a passport from a country called Taurid. Officials, confused, allegedly confined him overnight. By morning, all of his documentation, his luggage, and himself had vanished. In 2018, journalist Alex Kasprak at Snopes.com traced the story to a 1964 anthology called The Directory of Possibilities, and to even earlier European magazine fiction. No customs police or newspaper records in Japan mention such an event. The tale's internal geography also fails basic fact-checking. The traveler supposedly pointed to a spot between France and Spain that already corresponds with Andorra in the Pyrenees Mountains. Still, the story survives because it feels plausible. Air travel, border control, and passports are tangible bureaucratic systems. Placing the paranormal inside them gives the myth credibility somehow, but it also acts as a juxtaposition to the improbable. In May 2023, a clip circulated on TikTok and YouTube showing a woman at an unspecified airport arguing with officials over a passport from a country named Turenza. The footage appeared authentic until reporters at Yahoo News and NDTV located the original file. A promotional skit produced for a visual effects channel based in Spain. The passport was an art prop, and no arrest occurred. This is a textbook example of how digital culture produces instant folklore. Within 48 hours, screenshots of the fake passport were posted with captions calling it proof of a time slip or a parallel universe traveler. Once misinformation anchors itself to a familiar format, airport video, police body cam, or Ring doorbell feed, viewers accept it as evidence. The classic American entry into this category is Rudolph Fentz, allegedly found dead in Times Square in 1951, wearing 19th century clothing and carrying coins minted before the 1900s. For decades, paranormal books cited it as a verified police report. In 2000, Spanish researcher Chris Auback, co-founder of the historical anomalies group Magonia Exchange, discovered its origin. In 1951, a short story titled I'm Scared by author Jack Finney printed in Collier's magazine. Finney later became famous for Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The Fentz story was pure fiction, but because early researchers cited it without tracking sources, it entered paranormal literature as fact. Even the Journal of Borderland Science reprinted it in 1972. Today, Fentz is a cautionary case study in how narrative authority, with phrases like according to police files, can outlive the writer who invented them. But there's some weirdness happening as well, and not all anomalies are solved under scrutiny. Just before dawn on the morning of December 12, 1992, Arnold Archambault and Ruby Brugier, aged 20 and 18 respectively, left a car Archambault had been driving following an accident at an intersection near Lake Andes, South Dakota. They left Brugier's 17-year-old cousin, Tracy Dion, in the car without any explanation as to where they might be going, and their whereabouts remained unknown for the next 3 months. One woman told police that she had later seen Archambault at a New Year's Eve party, but the families never saw the couple again. In early March 1993, the bodies of Archambault and Brugier were found in water-filled depression between the accident site and a disused railroad right-of-way, just a short distance from the road. The cause of death was determined to be exposure, but the investigators found the death suspicious, believing that the two had not died right after the accident. Both the Charles Mix County Sheriff at the time and one of his deputies had visited the scene in the intervening months, when the weather was warm and there was minimal snow. Neither had seen the bodies at those times, and others who had been in the area made similar statements. Other aspects of the bodies suggested that the two might have died elsewhere and perhaps at different times. Brugier's body had to be identified by a tattoo, as it was in an advanced state of decomposition. She was dressed in clothes that she had been wearing the night of the accident, but without the shoes and the glasses. Archambault's body, found underwater in the depression, showed far less decomposition. A set of keys found in his pocket was never found to match any house or car in the area. A segment of the television series Unsolved Mystery filmed at the site aired in 1995. The FBI took over the investigation but closed it in 1999 as they could not find any evidence that a crime had been committed. Local law enforcement who were involved in the investigation believe that, at the very least, the couple's bodies were placed there after they died somewhere else, because they had gone over that same location multiple times. The case demonstrates that temporal anomalies sometimes stem from investigation gaps rather than violations of physics. Still, it underlines how fragile our sense of chronology becomes when data points don't align. By cataloging more than 60 publicly available reports of these time slips from 1901 to 2023, researcher Jenny Randles found several common denominators. Most incidents last under 5 minutes. Environmental silence and visual flattening occur in 80% of the cases. No verified photograph or instrument reading exists for any alleged time slip. Randles concluded that the experiences are real to the witness but not objectively recorded, suggesting a perceptual, not physical cause. Even skeptical reviewers such as psychologist Richard Wiseman at the University of Hertfordshire recommended continued documentation because the pattern is consistent and psychologically valuable. So now that we have some stories about time slips and out-of-place people, we need to figure out how a time slip could occur, if it ever did. And if that's the case that it did occur, then we need to look first to physics. Einstein's general theory, confirmed by the 2015 LIGO gravitational wave detections, shows that time and space form a single fabric, space-time, that bends under mass and energy. The Hafele-Keating experiment in 1971 proved that atomic clocks flown eastward around the Earth lagged behind identical clocks left stationary. Time dilation is a measurable fact. On the subatomic level, events are governed by probability. In 2012, physicists at the University of Vienna conducted delayed choice tests where measurement decisions made after a photon passed through an apparatus appeared to affect its earlier state. This retrocausal behavior implies that future observation can influence past conditions. Some theoretical physicists, including John Kramer of the University of Washington, proposed transactional models in which waves travel both forward and backward in time to complete interactions. Under Minkowski's four-dimensional space-time interpretation, every moment, past, present, and future, exists simultaneously as coordinates within single structures. We experience those coordinates sequentially because consciousness moves through them in one direction. A time slip could represent an atypical intersection between two coordinates, a temporary overlap in perception rather than a physical relocation. None of this requires supernatural forces. It requires only that perception is linked to the quantum behavior of matter. Science rarely stops at physics. The human brain itself can distort time. Neuroscientist Philanayur Ramachandran, and I'm sure I completely destroyed that name and I apologize. He notes that seizures or microstimulation in the temporal lobes can cause vivid reliving of memories or construction of historically detailed scenes. Patients report past lives or past period experiences lasting seconds. Psychologists Daniel Schachner and Elizabeth Loftus demonstrate that memory is not retrieval, but recreation. Each recall rewrites the event. A strong emotional state, fear, awe, or disorientation can merge towards imagery with perception, creating the illusion of time displacement. Researcher Vic Tandy from Coventry University documented how infrasound at about 19 Hz caused nausea, panic, and visual distortion. Frequencies at that range resonate with the human eye's own physical vibration, producing ghost-like apparitions and slowed perception. Many old structures, like tunnels and sewers, naturally generate such a sound. Locations like Bolt Street's underground rail lines and Roughham's hollow fields fit that acoustic profile. When you combine electromagnetic variation, infrasound, and psychological stress, you produce exactly the conditions under which perception can desync with expectation. A time slip could then be a neurological anomaly, the brain briefly projecting stored imagery into current input. I find this explanation functional but incomplete. It accounts for single witness cases, but not for the few instances where multiple observers report the same anomaly simultaneously. Shared perceptual error on that scale is rare, but not impossible. It occurs in mass panic and false memory studies, though usually with social prompting. At some point, we'll go over interesting mass panic events with supernatural elements in the future episodes. Every credible discipline, physics, psychology, environmental science, offers partial answers. None fully explain why the same sensory template occurs across continents and decades. That's where interpretation begins. My opinion is that these incidents are perceptual intersections inside a nonlinear framework of reality. The evidence does not support mechanical time travel. It supports momentary cross-visibility within what I like to call the quantum box. Picture reality as a four-dimensional lattice containing every moment that has ever happened or will happen. Consciousness moves through it along one pathway, creating the illusion of time's flow. Each point on that lattice already exists. Our awareness simply illuminates one coordinate at a time. In rare conditions, perhaps when electromagnetic fields, emotions, or attention align, the boundaries blur and another coordinate becomes visible. Nothing moves. The witness perceives a neighboring frame because the human mind processes perception sequentially. The experience feels like slipping forward or backwards. Quantum physics provides the metaphorical mechanism. Just as entangled particles respond to each other instantaneously across vast spaces, consciousness could be entangled across time within the same universal wave function. When that entanglement spikes, perception might momentarily sample a different statistical outcome. I call it the quantum box because, like Schrodinger's cat, multiple states coexist until observed. We inhabit one version because our observation collapses it. A time slip might be a brief instant before that collapse, awareness catching two states at once. This model also aligns with spiritual perspectives. Mystical traditions describe time as an illusion separating simultaneous realities. Physics, stripped of metaphors, edges towards the same conclusion. Time is geometry, not motion. The quantum box is where geometry and consciousness can meet. So, if the quantum box model is accurate, several predictions will follow. Time slips should cluster in areas of strong electromagnetic variation because such environments disrupt normal neural coherence. Durations will remain short, since consciousness rapidly restabilizes to its dominant state. Physical evidence will be minimal. Objects from the alternate frame would revert once observation collapses. Multiple witnesses increase probability because shared attention can synchronize perceptual states. Testing this would require environmental sensors correlated with eyewitness interviews, essentially treating time slips as psychological physics experiments. I would imagine going to a researcher and asking for this work to be done with a lack of funding approvals, and the stigma of pseudoscience would prevent such work. Who's going to pay for that, honestly? Even if time slips are illusions, they reveal something profound about human experiences. We construct reality through attention. When that process falters, the cracks expose how fragile linear perception really is. Whether caused by magnetic fields or metaphysics, each case reminds us that the present is not fixed, it's selected. If, on the other hand, even one time slip is genuine, if Moberly and Jourdain truly saw the 18th century alive for a few moments, then the quantum box isn't theory, it's the architecture of existence. It would mean every moment, including this one, endures somewhere. The past doesn't vanish, it only stops being rendered to our awareness. That idea reshapes questions about consciousness and survival. In a nonlinear universe, death and birth are coordinates, not boundaries. Spiritual continuity becomes a feature of our physics as well as faith. It's an unsettling but hopeful possibility that every second of our lives persists, complete and accessible, waiting for perception to align. When I examine these files, the archival reports, the psychological studies, the quantum theories, I don't see fantasy. I see data points at the intersection of science and human perception. The challenge isn't proving time slips happen, it's defining what time actually is. Most of science assumes linear progression because the measurement tools depend on it. But the deeper we look, the less linear the universe becomes. Gravitational waves curve it. Quantum equations ignore direction entirely. The only thing insisting on sequence is the observer. That observer is us. Consciousness may be a paintbrush, not the canvas. The quantum box theory reframes time as the canvas on which awareness paints. If that's true, then a time slip is a brushstroke that briefly crosses another color of reality. Well, that's it for tonight. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe, tell a friend, and spread the word. The more you tell others, the larger the conversation can become. So if you ever walked into a place that felt out of date or stepped into silence that didn't belong to the moment, tell me about it. You can submit your story to mike@arcane-station.com or message the show on social media on Instagram @ArcaneStation2 or TikTok @ArcaneStation. Each report, verified or not, helps map the edges of what we call time. Until next time, keep questioning everything, because the moment we stop asking what's possible, we stop noticing when the impossible happens.